Good morning. How was that for a countdown? You didn't know I had all that magic, did you? I am Jill. That's not Deb. This is the Friday Grief Chat, and she is on a beach in Oregon with a dear friend, and they are needing some of that time that only friends can share. I am so glad she's doing that. I'm glad you're here with me, and I want us to have a chance to talk today about the things that we talked about sort of last week, but I also want to talk about it from the perspective of what we can do so we don't get off track in our lives while we are trying to navigate the life we are in. For those of you not in the United States, not in country, welcome, and keep an eye on us. We kind of need you right now. For those of us who are here, we know typically those who are here with us are folks who sort of see eye to eye with Deb and me, but sometimes we have people in our worlds who don't. I know I do have a few of those that I'm related to in various ways. And if we don't see eye to eye, that doesn't mean we have to have a constant conflict. We can manage it in a variety of ways. But one of the things we can do, especially, is talk about how grief is part of everything we are experiencing right now, which is why we have Humor, Grace, and Grief. We put this together because Deb and I, during the pandemic, remember that division? During that time, we felt like it was so important for the two of us and for our grief community and for our greater communities around us and around the world to have a space to share what we were experiencing in the isolation, in the not knowing what's coming, in the discomfort, in the humor that was sometimes a wee bit off track. At our house, we bought a friend's poster to go on a fence we had in our backyard at the time. And it said that one when we were in the pandemic. And it was from a friend's episode. We left that up for 2 years. That was the backdrop for everything from home haircuts to friends visiting who were in our collective and friends who were not, who were further out, right? We needed to be able to find a space that had humor because humor is indeed how people survive grief. Otherwise, we literally die. Grief is a hard thing to do. It's got physical complications. It can cause heart issues. It can cause stroke. It can cause lack of sleep, which can cause mental health issues. It can and does cause lack of sleep. It can cause eating disorders or recur them. It can enhance and increase depression and anxiety, as if a pandemic didn't do that all by itself, you know. We had all of that, and we had political conflict around the loss of the pandemic, the multiple layers of loss of the pandemic. We had people who were with us who were in the mortuary and funeral industry who couldn't do the things that they had done all their lives to support people. We had nurses who couldn't physically touch patients except through barriers. We had all kinds of folks who were experiencing so many kinds of losses, and we needed to find ways to find humor to deal with that. And sometimes humor is not always pretty, but it does do what it needs to do to get us through it, right? So we started this because we wanted to talk about the humor. We wanted to talk about giving grace because folks who are grieving, sometimes they're a little edgy, and they need to be because they need a little space, and they want that space to be respected, and they want their needs to be respected in the way that they need them to be, not in the way others impose them in terms of how they do grief and how they do loss and how they interact, right? We had to learn all kinds of new skills during that time. We had to learn how to do conferences around the world online. We had to learn how to do virtual studios, and I'm in one right now. Who knew? I don't know how all of it works because they keep adding bells and whistles, but we have a studio. right? We had to learn how to do haircuts and how to shop online and how to return things from shopping online and all the things. And we did all that. And now here we are in the grief of what's going on and what's underneath all the things that we need the humor and the grace for. And that's where we are today here in these United States and in other countries too that are being impacted in other ways. We know there are other conflicts in other corners of the world. We are not so self-centered that we don't recognize other areas don't have conflict and tragedy and all the things. But we also know that our own country is causing that for many places. And we see our allies mobilizing in Greenland, for instance, to protect Greenland from us. And not a great feeling. So it's a challenge for many of us here. And underneath the challenge, underneath the hard feelings, underneath the anger, which is righteous, underneath the disappointment, underneath the not recognizing the place that we are now and how we got here and who all these people are that we thought we knew. And for many, that includes people in our own families, which we faced in the pandemic, because how many of you had people in your family who minimized how serious the pandemic was while you knew people who were dying? Well, right now we have friends who are in Minneapolis, and we have friends who are in the garment district of LA and who are in Chicago and all the places that people are showing up and really disrupting our world and making it unsafe, and people who are dying. So we have it here, we have it in other places in the world. And underneath all of that trauma, and it really is trauma, and this is trauma informed. I'm not here as a therapist. I happen to be one, but this is trauma informed. We are in the middle of collective trauma, more so than in a very long time. I do remember the trauma as a small child, seeing the planes coming back from Vietnam, and the trauma of families, and the trauma of families trying to figure out what to do for their teenage sons. And unbeknownst to me, my future wife was in the middle of that and was serving, as was her brother. But we have trauma now, and that trauma is surrounded by the grief, and the grief is where we are. And yeah, Steve said they were on medical lockdown and had to rely on humor because they were not used to being together 24/7. Brittany, it's tough because there's no way to grieve. You're right. The hits keep coming, and they do. Right? I have a friend I met through another friend, Father John, whose radio show I was on before he had to quit radio work because of his own terminal illness. She's in Minneapolis, front row. Our minister had a son who was a block away from the sites in Minneapolis where everything is taking place, just the week before it started. We have lots of right there trauma. And because we have social media, we're so interconnected. There's no getting away from it. I counsel my clients, turn off the news, turn off the news. Do you think I am turning off all the news? Now, I will tell you, I've turned off network news. I rarely turn on network news. I watch little bits here and there. I am selective. I make myself block out social media for hours at a time. I go to silly little videos and stay away from a lot of it much of the time. But when you're in collective trauma with things that just keep going and keep going and keep going, there's also a thriving need for a lot of people to know what else happened, right? I come home from work and I walk in and we have a few minutes of downtime, and then it's, what did you see today? What do we need to know about? Should we just lock it all down and forget it? What do we need to know so that we feel like we have some kind of power around our lives versus feeling powerless and uneducated and not knowing what's happening? But how do we mitigate that need so that it's not overtaking us? So it's not 24/7 news channel, because that's something we got used to in COVID, wasn't it? We were never all home before. We didn't have 24. We knew we had 24-hour news, but we didn't know to watch it because we weren't home. We were out and about, and suddenly we weren't. And that's when I decided, in the midst of all this, I need to revert back to some of the coping skills I used with my little people that I saw online during the pandemic. Brittany says, as a disabled person, trying to keep tabs on the risk while managing health and sanity, it really is tricky. I totally agree. Anyone with an autoimmune disorder, anyone with a wheelchair, seeing people in wheelchairs being tossed around, there's so much additional layers of trauma for so many groups, people of various nationalities, people with darker skin color, people who are older, people who have immigrants in their families, people who've been immigrants and citizens for a long time but don't know if they're going to remain citizens. There's so many layers of this, right? But what I did with my little people to pull us out of all of it was I took full advantage of all of the online webcams that showed empty places where there were normally crowds. Now, we don't have that now, and I'm not webcamming any of the places where there is violence. I am assiduously not doing that. But there is that ability to pull back out of it. I would take kids I saw on tours of Venice to see the dolphins playing in the canals. And I would take them to beaches that were empty before people realized they could go back to beaches carefully. And I would take them to resorts where there was nobody and they got to see a world. And I'd remind them, someday when you are older, much older, closer to your old therapist, because they thought, at that time, wow, 50, you're really old. So in those days, you got to see those places empty, because that'll never happen again in our world. So what do we do with this now? What we do is we share the grief. We find ways to really, truly share the grief. And instead of, I'm so angry all the time, let's start with the grief part. I'm heartbroken about what's happening. How's that for a statement? This is heartbreaking. And it is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking on so many layers. I'm scared. I'm sad. I'm exhausted. It gives permission for other people to share that. If once you say that, you stop talking and give someone else a chance to say where they are too, right? We can do that online. We can do that in person. We can do that in emails. We can send a text. Today was a scary day. You okay today? You hanging in there? I'm very fortunate. I have a girlfriend's chat and I have a cousin's chat. And so we have those spaces that have been created that we honestly didn't have before we needed them for COVID. And now we've transitioned that into all of it. We don't have to have an argument every time. We can create some circles amongst ourselves. We do that in our supervision groups. Sorry for the ums this morning, folks. I've only had half a cup of coffee. I'm drinking it down as fast as I can. We do that in our group supervision for our students. And I do that for our students when they're at our nonprofit center, CCS Education and Wellness, because sitting around our conference table, we can talk about what's happening, how it's impacting their clients, but also how it's impacting them. Many of our students are very young. Now they've got master's degrees, but relative to me, they're young. How is this impacting them? They grew up thinking that they were going to live in a safer space, that our lesbian and gay folks were going to be able to count on being respected as who they are, that our trans clients are not safe, because trans folks are pretty much never safe. Likewise, many of our Jewish folks are never quite safe, including my family members, but safer. And now it's much less safe. And there's open hostility towards some of those communities. We can help them find and help ourselves find, if we need it, a faith community or a vigil or some place where they can gather, where we can gather. At our local Unitarian Universalist congregation here in Riverside this evening, we're having a candlelight gathering. We, as in the community, I'm not you. I go to the Congregational Church across the street. But they've put out the welcome mat for everybody. And I hope lots of people will show up. I'm going to measure my energy and see how much I have left of me at the end of the day, because that's the other part of it, is we need to be able to measure our energy and figure out how much we have. Sorry, Zorro is here now. He is awakened and he's joined us for the conversation. There's a little humor, the Zorro face, right? We can find places where, if you're an artist, you can play your music, create your music. We couldn't do that during the pandemic. We can go to a coffee house now. Not to say that it's entirely physically safe, because we got critters running around, but you can go play guitar or drum or paint or throw some clay. We have a new clay workshop here in town. I am very excited about that. Some people are tactile. I am that person. I am not artistic, not like Deb, but I am tactile. And it's fun to do things that involve feeling textures, and especially clay, and seeing what you can do with it. Grief also lets us communicate how the policies around us are affecting us from a grief perspective. I am so sad to see what's happening to this place, that place, this group, that group. Sorry, Zorro apologizes. He has a problem trachea. We can invite others to share, to say what they need to say, to express what they're feeling. I can invite Linnea Hoff in Minneapolis to tell me what it's like to have to go out early for prescriptions because she doesn't know what time ICE is going to show up in a neighborhood today. And she's a senior and she shouldn't be out where it's not safe. We have kids who are mourning lost futures and people who are electing to leave the country. I've got friends who have left. I've got people who are getting passports to get out. Stephen, thank you. Zorro loves being here. Yes, he does. Look at that little face. See those? If you're not watching, you should at some point watch a clip of this. Zorro looks a little devilish with this mask on and his kind of bluey eyes, right? We've got lots of places where we can share some of this stuff. Because sharing stories, not just opinions, sharing how all of these things are impacting us, and then doing something about it to reclaim power. I am the person who knows that Washington, D.C. opens way earlier than the West Coast does. And so I am on the phone frequently, quietly, when I'm getting ready in the morning, calling different senators and House members. Not my senators and House members. They're doing the right things. But I have no problem telling somebody else that I think that they are not being the kind of people they need to be, that their policies are evil, hateful, hurtful. I'm the parent who, with my late wife, Linda, took our kids to Washington, D.C. on the regular because we had one who had medical care there. But then we walked the halls of Congress, and we'd had a year where especially the Republican group had been on C-SPAN repeatedly using horrible, denigrating terms to talk about families like ours and to talk about taking children from gay and lesbian parents and putting them with the right kind of parents. And Oklahoma had just passed their first time the law that they keep trying to put into place, where if somebody comes into their state as a lesbian couple or a gay couple, Oklahoma would take the children and place them in adoption homes with good Christian families. They've never actually implemented the law, but they've passed it a bunch of times. And we went to the different Republican delegation offices and we took a letter with a family portrait and we said, these are our kids and they're hearing you talk. And you need to talk like grown-ups and with respect. Boy, if I'd known then what I know now about what they were capable of, that is grief for me. Yes, it's anger, but it's grief because they're being horrible about their fellow Americans. They're teaching children to be hateful. It's not something kids ever need to learn. There's way too many opportunities for them to get that as teenagers and adults. We don't need to teach them that as little people. We don't. And they didn't. And so we went office to office. We got to one Georgia congressman's office, and the guy running the office did not get what I was saying. And he brought us in there and put my kids in that guy's chair with the dead animals on the back wall and took our picture. Yes, he did. I put that on our Christmas card that year, along with the kids in stocks at Williamsburg, because you got to balance it a little. And parenting is all about the creativity. We've got lots of ways we can take our anger and make it grief, which is where it's coming from, to talk about the loss of trust, the loss of rights, the lost lives, the lost futures. Who's not going to have the future they thought they would have for their kids? Right? We've got so much going on. We can talk about our fear for our kids. I talk about my fear for my grandchildren. Yes, I probably would happily exit and find another place to be, someplace else. But my grandchildren are here. And that's not going to happen. I would never, ever leave my grandchildren. I am that grandmother. And the doodlebugs. You know, they don't travel well, these senior poodles. Most countries do not want a family showing up with 6 senior poodles who are blind and needy. So we know that we are limited in our getaways. I am keeping that little town in Washington in the back of my head, though, the one that sits off of Canada. That's I am, when I'm having a bad day with all of this, I visualize living there. And I look up real estate sales there, because you can always take the fantasy and put it partly into operation and give yourself that break. That one that Deb and I do, and used to do at the end of every show, right? You hold tight and you breathe. And I let myself go someplace else that doesn't feel so hard. And so I don't have to feel all the heartbreak for so long, for so much, right? And we can connect. When I was doing a grief group at the beginning of the pandemic, we had one woman in a grief group I was doing who would put on a pot of matzo ball soup early in the morning. And at the end of group at noon, whoever was having the toughest week, she would take that pot of soup and drive over to their house. If you don't know the book Love You Forever, you should look it up, with the mom who takes her ladder and puts it up against her adult son's house and goes up the ladder to peek in on him. Okay, well, she didn't do that. She drove over in her car and she put the pot of matzo ball soup on the doorstep and then called from the car, because pandemic, and she provided that nurturing and that support and that love for that person in that moment. We can write letters. We can write letters to each other. Deb may have a package waiting for her when she gets home from Oregon that should have a special significance for her when she opens it. My sister has a package arriving today with some stones from a town called Quartzsite in Arizona, where we used to go with our dad. I drove through there with my other sister and my daughter on our way back from my middle daughter's house. My sister's got a package coming, which connects her to her past and gives her a sense of, we can use the U.S. mail for that. And our mail carriers need our support too. They're not exactly popular with the current administration right now. And we need to support them too. Because grieving doesn't mean giving up. It means acknowledging that something precious has been taken or is being harmed. And we need to find a way to take some of that back and to mitigate the harm. Brittany says there's a woman named Charlotte in the UK who's becoming pen pals with people in the US and is keeping the US letters safe in another country. How cool is that? There is a book from the Holocaust called I Never Saw Another Butterfly. And I know that book because my older sister, Anne, read it as a teenager. She was quite connected to those losses, even as a teen, and in a family that wasn't Jewish, but had great respect and great connections to the Jewish community and our neighbors. And it was a series of poems and artwork done by kids living in, I think, Theresienstadt. I could be wrong, but it was one of those horrible camps. And an adult had taken all of them and put them in a jar and buried them. And they were resurrected decades later and bound into this book. If you haven't seen it, it's called I Never Saw Another Butterfly. It's very relevant to today, actually. So yeah, if you know people in Europe or other places, send some letters and send some articles and get them out of here. Send some pictures, share your camera photos. We've got lots of ways we can share our collective grief and our sadness and not give up and still acknowledge that we need to have time to laugh. I go outside and laugh at my doodle bugs, right? This one is comedy sometimes. He thinks he is the baddest little guy. He is 7 pounds. He is nearly blind. He barks at walls. And yet he hunts my dog, Fred, everywhere he goes. And when he can, he goes after Fred, even though he knows his head is going to end up in Fred's clutches. Fred's only 14 pounds. It's not super serious. But he has a need to go after somebody, and it's comedy. Then it's not, and then I go get him, right? We feed the birds in the backyard, and we watch the blue jays come, and we watch the little ones come, and then we watch the pigeons come, the big old pigeons, 4 of them trying to balance on one bird feeder, swinging wildly. My wife calls them the goofballs, and they bring great joy to us. Steve says his dog Honor is 5 years today. That's his saving grace. Honor really is his saving grace, along with a certain someone. We can find ways to take breaks, to laugh, to give ourselves grace in the grief, to say thank you to those who are helping with it. My thank you goes out to everyone watching, everyone who watches afterward, everyone who shares, everyone who subscribes, and especially to a certain Deborah Joy Hart, who I hope is sitting on a beach in Oregon right now. This is our way of trying to do the give back, and it's also our way of connecting and sharing the grief and finding the humor and finding the grace. So I hope this was helpful today. I hope you have a good weekend. Here in Southern California, it is 71 degrees. I know some of you are chilly and snowy. We are not. We're windy, but we're warm. I hope that you have a good time with people you love, or connecting with people you love, or taking care of the pets and watering the garden. If you don't have a garden, now's the time to go buy your tomato plant, put your hands in the dirt, put it on even a balcony or your kitchen window. Everybody needs to touch garden dirt. All right, one collective breath. We'll be back next week. Bye, everybody.